Welcome to the podcast, Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage, where it's all about discovering the thoughts that get you in the mood, the thoughts that get you out of the mood, and how creating a deeper connection with yourself creates a deeper connection with your spouse. I'm your coach, Shelly Anderson, coaching you through life, love, and intimacy. This is episode number 87. What kind of a spouse does that?
This spouse.
Today we're going to talk about this question because I have found that, especially this comes up with my clients. They just, when they're struggling with something, their spouse does. They assume that anyone and everyone would feel exactly like they do. It's a huge assumption. And so this is such a fun question, and it comes up quite a bit. And sometimes if we don't verbalize it, we're thinking it.
Well, let's admit it. We all are pathetic spouses from time to time.
It's true.
In our relationship, it's more me than you, but you're not perfect.
No.
Thank goodness, because if she was perfect, I would feel a lot worse.
So as I was thinking about this topic, I was thinking, okay, so what are some of the ones I hear the most? And these are some of them. These are some examples. What kind of husband wants to have sex every day?
This one. Well, not every day.
Like every single day.
Yeah, as you get older, you get tired, though. Like it comes down to energy. The desire might not be the issue, right? It's how much energy
the energy is diminishing. What kind of husband goes fishing 2 weekends in a row? 2.
Well,
2 weekends in a row.
I guess it depends on why they're going fishing.
To fish. What kind of a spouse goes hunting for 13 days straight?
I know some that do that, but
yeah.
I mean, you could say the same thing to me if I go on a vacation with my brother, like to surf or something like that.
Right.
So these all apply to everybody.
Yes, these come up.
So we're not just blaming hunters or fishers.
No. Or men who want to be intimate with their wives.
Right.
What kind of a husband gives his wife a dirty look?
I kind of like when I give you dirty looks and then you give it back to me, but it just depends on the spirit of it, right?
Right.
And what kind of dirty?
Yes. Another one is, what kind of a husband talks in a tone like that? And I remember when I was having this discussion with a client and they were explaining their frustration with the tone of their husband while they were talking through some things. And so as we were trying to explore the depth of this, like, was he disrespectful? No. Was he saying things that were rude? No. Was he yelling? No. What we found out was he was being honest. And
what kind of husband would be honest?
Yes. What kind of a husband would use an honest tone? So it's very interesting how sometimes when we're framing certain actions or behaviors or words of our spouse, we put a meaning on there that they never intended to be there. We do that.
What are some other ways that someone can say that? Because someone might not in their mind say, what kind of husband does that? What if they're like, why would you do that? Or I can't believe you did that. Or you must be this, making an assumption. I mean, what's the root of what you're getting at here? Does it have to be those words, or can it be something else?
No, it doesn't have to be those words. I think there's a lot of ways that this can come up. And I think we did an episode on this recently using the word should. That's usually a very big clue that there's some kind of assumption or an expectation that you had played out in your mind where you thought things were going to go one way or you thought your husband should communicate in a certain way and then they didn't.
Right. Okay. So this ties into that.
It does.
And I think all of the episodes tie into, they all connect.
Yes.
But I think it's important that we at least give some other examples that have the same spirit as that, right? Like Pack Your Shit Up was the title of that episode, and that was about the shoulds.
Yeah.
And in some ways, this is similar, but it's a different way of thinking, right? So we're covering a different angle or different perspective of thinking negatively about your spouse.
Yeah. And the reason this becomes such a challenging topic in between the husband and the wife is because when they start to think that their spouse has misbehaved in some way.
Ooh, behave. Reminds me of Austin Powers.
That's right, Austin Powers. They think something is going terribly wrong, right, in their marriage. And there's no need for that, but they do end up thinking, like, he's not doing things the way he's supposed to be doing them. Something is not right, when really that's usually our assumption, our interpretation of what they said. We add a lot of layers to our situation.
So you were telling me about, I think it was a client of yours recently. I don't know who they are, but they said this to you. They said, "What kind of a husband does this?" And you said, "All husbands."
Yes. This is my favorite answer, right? The human kind.
The human kind of husband.
Human husbands do that.
Right.
And I think sometimes we forget. I think we can easily just fall into this trap that because we have a spouse, because we're committed to them, that somehow they should just know certain things and then do them with accuracy and perfection most of the time, right? And it throws us really off when that doesn't happen. I think most of us would probably go into a marriage thinking, "Oh, we're going to talk nice to each other when we disagree." And then maybe those disagreements come up and we're like, "Wow, that didn't go as I planned. Something must be wrong. Something has gone horribly wrong with him."
This reminds me of someone who is a friend of mine. He's my parents' age, but he was telling a story about after he and his wife had just gotten married and everything was perfect for, a couple weeks. And it was a honeymoon. Oh, nothing could ever go wrong. And he talked about the first fight they had. And he was absolutely devastated because he thought, what is wrong? Like, she all of a sudden was angry with him for something. And I remember he was telling the story and he was tearing up. Like, he had gone back to this place where he felt true anguish because all of a sudden she was mad at him.
Yeah.
And I've had situations like that too. I think, when we got married, we were a little older and we had known each other a really long time. So I think maybe, it just depends on the situation. I don't remember ever feeling that way if we got in a disagreement, but early on in our marriage, I wasn't used to that. Not as much as I am now, right? After 20 years of marriage.
Oh, you're so used to it.
But, it really is crushing to people when the person that they admire the most or love the most or, need the most, all of a sudden is angry. And I doubt that people who have been married at least for a year or more still feel that way, but we're definitely not happy about it.
No.
And so there's got to be ways to avoid feeling that way.
Well, yeah. Part of what we have to realize is that this is all taking place in our mind.
Right.
Right. And so I love this example of the wife that's like, "What kind of a man gives his wife dirty looks?" I'm like, most of them, the human kind. I give my husband dirty looks, several times throughout the day. And so it really makes us self-reflect. Right. Instead of what we want to do is spouse correct. We want to tell our spouse, do all these things different so that I can feel better. But this is an opportunity for us to self-reflect and say, if most husbands give their wives a dirty look, this is a chance for me to level up. I need to skill up.
Right.
I don't have this skill of being able to talk to a wide variety of people, including my husband. Well, no matter what his looks are, no matter what his face is doing.
Your feelings are going to be hurt all the time.
Yeah, you will suffer. There will be a lot of suffering if we go around and spend our whole lives interpreting, being the interpreter, and assuming we know everyone's intentions.
Now, doesn't this also open up the door to blaming others too? Because if you're feeling like you're being attacked by people's looks or things that they say that are maybe honest or maybe not so honest, whatever it is, but if you're letting yourself think and make assumptions about that person, doesn't that also open the door and allow you to blame those people?
Yeah, I think blame would come in super quickly.
So therefore, then your whole world really is changed, and you're living in a world that is not true, right? There's this made up world that you've created when you let yourself do this. Now we all do it. I do it. Shelly does it. We all do it. But as we learn how to decrease these tendencies as humans to make assumptions of what they mean or define things that shouldn't be defined a certain way, and then blame others for causing us to feel a certain way, then we have to justify those feelings by acting in accordance with that.
Right.
And so all of a sudden our world is kind of turned upside down, and we've done that. Other people haven't done that. We've done it.
We've done it.
And so this is one of the critical key areas of marriage, I think, in our marriage, where we've realized we can't make assumptions. And when we do, it makes an ass out of you and me, right? You guys know that joke, but it's true.
Yeah.
Okay, so what do we do? What's something that we can do about this right now, today?
Well,
how can we help everybody?
I think number one, we have to remember we're married to a human. Our spouse is having their own experience in life, and it's not meant to be exactly the same as ours. And we have to allow room for that. So if our spouse is confused by something we're saying or disagrees and they have a look on their face, they're allowed to have that experience. It doesn't mean something negative about us. And so I think we have to really take a step back if we find ourselves feeling really negative quickly, is to say, wait, I'm dealing with a human. Yes, they're my spouse, but they're human. They're having a human experience right now.
Can I make a comment about women and men?
Of course.
Okay. I don't want to offend anybody, but I might, and I'm okay with that. It's up to you if you're offended or not. But I see, now you tell me if I'm wrong, and I'm going to make a judgment here, and I shouldn't do this. But oftentimes men in our society, in our culture, oftentimes we're kind of like the little boys and the women are more mature. And so sometimes women see us as, oh, he's an animal when it comes to sex. He's a little boy when it comes to being responsible with the kids. He has no idea what I go through every day. And now I say this because I agree. First of all, I think in general, women are very strong and they're very capable. And in this world, in this society, we have kind of put a lot of that responsibility and that praise on men, but we don't really deserve it. And it's easy, I think, to judge the husband, and it's easy to judge the wife too. It goes both ways. But I see this often with men who feel like they're being, put down by their wife. And I felt this way too, not because you do this to me, but I do it to myself. So I can also do this even though I'm being the one who may be immature and you're being honest with me. I'm saying, well, what kind of a lover or a wife or someone who loves me would treat me like an adult or like someone who's responsible? Because you're just supposed to love me all the time and praise me for bringing home the bacon and for, whatever, impregnating you.
Right.
I mean, I think this is real thinking that men have, right? And so what would women say to that? Because I think that's what a lot of men would say.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of women would agree with you.
Right? They would agree with me.
They would agree, but that's why we're talking about this, because that is kind of a lot of times where their mind will go, right?
So
I'm married to a teenager.
Yeah. Okay. Not just because of the sexual desire, but also because I think sometimes when we get focused on whatever our responsibility is, whether it's work or, maybe it's a calling at church or something like that, and we get so focused on it and we actually, and this is not a good thing, and this is something that I've been through, but we, in a lot of ways, put those things above our families, above our wives, and we still expect our wife to appreciate the fact that we're doing so much for the family. And I feel like I'm kind of getting away from the topic here, but this is where my mind goes in this conversation.
Right.
And so I'm probably not the only one.
Right.
And I'm also, trying to, dirty this conversation up a little bit because it isn't as cut and dry as just, oh, well, what kind of a person does that? Well, why do we even get to that point? Right? Why do we get there?
Well, we get there because we think something has gone wrong, right? We
Right.
assume something has gone wrong. And so that's why I think when we take a step back and say, and allow for our spouse to go through their experience, even if it's very different than ours, even if we don't agree with it or we're having a hard time ourselves with whatever the situation is to remember they're human. They are going to go through stuff.
What kind of a spouse wears sweatpants and black t-shirts every single day? This one. And I say that because I've had the thought, well, how come you can't just look pretty all the time? Why can't you have yourself all done up all the time for me? Right? You should be, trying to be attractive for me.
Right.
What kind of a spouse doesn't want to look sexy for her husband all the time?
24 hours a day.
24 hours a day.
Just ready.
Right?
Sexy.
I walk into the bedroom, I'm expecting you to be like in something super sexy, you're all, laid out on the bed, ready for me to come in more ways than one, right?
Yes.
Okay, but it goes both ways. I mean, I'm just saying from a man's point of view, these are the kinds of thoughts that we have.
Right.
And it might be that dirty look that you gave us, but really what we might be thinking is, why isn't she trying to be sexy for me? Why is she trying to make me mad?
Yeah. Well, and I think going along with what you're saying, kind of some of the bigger thoughts behind it is something's not right. Something's gone wrong. I got a bad batch with this wife.
Oh, yeah.
Where's the exchange policy here?
Oh, man. I've never thought that, but I've thought, how can I change my wife so she will always be like ready to go and
Right.
want me and show me that she wants me?
Yes. And I think when we are in that place, we have a huge assumption in the back of our mind that other spouses, if I had a different spouse, that one would always be ready. It'd be sex 24 hours a day, always sexy, right?
You know that couple down the street, they're always doing it like all the time. I mean, you can just tell when they're out in public, oh, they're all over each other all the time. It's got to be like that all the time.
Right, all the time. So again, it goes back to we're making all kinds of assumptions about our spouse and also about what other people are doing and how they're experiencing life. And if our circumstance was different, if we had a different spouse, then we would feel happy inside. Everything would be great.
It's such a lie.
Right.
And it's not a lie that anyone else really tells us. I mean, we get this from the world, right? From media, especially. Like we watch movies and watch TV shows, and the sexiness never ends.
Right.
And they don't show the real side. But we're the ones that choose to believe that, right? We're the ones that choose to live in this illusion where things are always like that and always good.
And I think that we've talked about this before. That's a trap. It's a huge trap to think.
Honey pot.
To think that life is always going to be on the up, right? And then so when things are great, we're happy. We're like, yes, we're meant to be with this person.
Yeah.
I love you. He loves me. Match made in heaven, right? It's fabulous. But then when it starts to go back down, our minds can be so dramatic the mind drama
The
that comes.
horrible-izing that happens.
Yes, I love that word, the horrible-izing.
I horrible-ize you sometimes. Not as, I shouldn't say not as much as I used to. It just depends on where I'm at.
Yeah.
It depends on where I am. And I think the beauty of this, the name of this podcast is Restore Yourself, Restore Your Marriage. We can't really improve our marriage unless we're working on ourselves.
Yes.
Because I sit and I like, why can't she do this? Why can't she do that? Why can't I change her? Now, if I'm not changing myself, then why the hell would you want to change? Why would you want to?
That's kind of how it works.
Yeah.
It's really hard to fix a marriage and try to fix your spouse when you are already feeling pretty broken inside.
So when I'm having those thoughts, when I'm like, why isn't she doing this? What kind of a wife would do that? Just what would you say to me from a coaching perspective so that I can quickly know that I'm doing that and also want to change it? Like if I have the desire, like I think most people have a desire to not be that way.
Yeah.
But we're going to do it. You are going to do this. You will. You have. And if you don't realize that you have been doing it, now you do. And this is going to haunt you in your sleep and in your waking hours because it's pathetic in a lot of ways. But we all do it. We're all pathetic to some degree. But what would you tell me? How can you help me?
Well, you already nailed it, actually. Part of the answer is thought awareness. And we've talked about this probably on every episode.
Because it's so important, right?
It's so important. And I think what a lot of times we don't realize is because we're having a conversation or we're thinking certain things, we think we have high thought awareness. What we don't realize is that the thoughts that we are actually focused on, like why can't my spouse just do this thing, is that we didn't choose to think that thought, right? That thought is at the tail end of how our brain works and delivers us thoughts. Most of our thoughts are happening at an unconscious level. We're not aware of them. But when we are involved in thinking, most of the thoughts that we are aware of have just been delivered to us by our brain. Our brain is trying to be very helpful. And it's saying, look what your spouse did. Here's this thought about it. You've thought this several times. This is an easy thought for you to think. You're very familiar with this thought. So our brain, it doesn't even challenge it or question it. It's just like, oh, why did he do that? Why can't he do these things? And so part of life coaching is being able to say, start recognizing your thoughts, and then challenge them. Did I choose to think that thought? Or is this one that my brain just delivered and I just happened to run with it? I've been thinking this thought for 5 minutes straight and I'm furious right now. But we probably did not choose to think that thought. And the way I think maybe to make this more clear is if we take this example, like if we're talking and you give me a dirty look and I start thinking, what kind of a husband would give his wife a dirty look, right? When I start to increase my thought awareness, I challenge that. Why am I thinking that question when he changes his face? Did I choose to think this question about what kind of a spouse does that?
I'm just going to wear a mask all the time because I think now everyone wears masks. Hopefully people are stopping, but isn't that a problem, right? Because we're not seeing each other and we're not responding that way. We just see a mask.
Well, yeah, that does pose its own set of challenges.
Hopefully you take your mask off when you get home.
Yeah.
Please take your mask off when you get home.
With your spouse. So I think being able to increase your thought awareness and challenge where your thoughts are coming from. And just ask yourself this question. Did my brain just deliver this thought to me? Or did I choose to think this on purpose? Because what usually you're going to find is if you're angry and you're suffering or you're sad, you did not choose to think that thought. Right. Your brain was trying to be helpful and it really just delivered it to you. And so when we are able to kind of almost look inside of our brain and say, hey, what's going on in there? What is my brain doing? How is it trying to help me? That gives us the space to think about our thinking think about that process on a different level without having to respond or react right in the moment. It gives us that beautiful space so we don't overreact and then regret what we've done and say, I wish I wouldn't have done that. I wish I wouldn't have called him out and called him a jerk for doing that.
This is one of the reasons why like the whole cancel culture thing is so bad, right? Trying to censor people who say things that they didn't think about or said a long time ago, right? We need to be able to give each other room to change.
And to grow.
And to grow.
And to learn.
And if all of a sudden someone says something we don't agree with and you just shut them down, like we see that all over the place, especially in social media right now. And we have for the last couple of years, especially really intensely. But is that how people live their lives at home? The ones that make those decisions, is that how they treat the people that they love? Is just to shut them down? Like, I'm out of here. You're done. Over.
I bet for a lot of people it is.
That's so sad because that doesn't give us any room to grow, doesn't give us any room to make mistakes and then to realize that we made those mistakes and feel bad about them and then change.
I agree 100%. I think we need to remember, especially in today's age, there's a lot happening. We're exposed to so much more information and have so much available to us than any other time before. And I think if we shut down the notion of, hey, I'm learning more, I'm growing more. I used to think this one way 10 years ago, but because of what I've learned, because of my experiences, I've changed. I now think like this. We have to leave room for that. If we expect that humans will never change, we're in trouble.
Right. We're in big trouble. Forgiveness is really important. Now, we're not talking about anything major, like someone did something, really bad to their spouse, right? There's lines here, but we're talking about every day. And this does apply to really intense things too.
Of course.
That takes a little bit more work to get through. But oftentimes those really bad things end up happening because we can't get past the little things.
That's very true. And those
Freaking
little
get
things.
Get past it. Get over it.
And the little things we don't realize, but there's a couple things that can happen. Number one, they can add up.
Yeah. And they will add up if you don't work through it.
Yeah. And the other thing is that what we will find is that the more we think a certain negative thought about our spouse, like we're giving that thought so much power, and it could be doing all kinds of damage to the relationship and the marriage as a whole. And so it may seem like a harmless question to be like, what kind of a spouse would do that? It can do all kinds of damage.
Yeah.
If that's where our focus is on that type of questioning, we don't feel good about our spouse. We usually don't feel good about ourselves. And that has a trickle out effect onto probably all of the other areas of our life.
Right.
So being able to really challenge ourselves in that way can have a huge positive effect, even if you don't solve it right then. One of my favorite expressions that I discovered through life coaching was express your process, because it gives so much room when you don't have an answer. I love to say, you know what, like my brain needs a minute to process what you just said, or I wasn't expecting this to happen and it has really caught me off guard. And my brain needs another minute to catch up.
What kind of a spouse needs a minute to catch up?
The humankind.
What are you talking about? You should know exactly what you're going to say all the time.
Why is your
brain so slow?
My brain it's actually a very busy brain. And I can think multiple thoughts at any given moment. And it takes me a lot of time to be able to say, this is the thought I need to pay attention to. So when something throws me off guard, it takes like even twice as much effort to say, wait a minute, like what's my brain doing right now? I need to slow things down. But being able to just even express that with your spouse, like, hey, I just need a minute. My brain is going a million miles an hour.
Yeah. This happens a lot. It happens all the time.
What? I think is so valuable, right? Because I'm not saying you've done something wrong or that you're a bad person or that I'm not skilled enough or that I'm a bad person. It's just being very transparent about like, wait a minute, I need a moment. And this is beautiful. This is a beautiful thing in relationships. It builds trust and it allows us that room to also not go to this place where we are making these horrible judgments about our spouse. So when we say, hey, I need a minute, let me collect my thoughts, we are showing so much love in that moment. It's an act of love to be able to do that, not just for yourself.
Is that because your initial response is just to fly off the handle and just say whatever comes to your mind? Like you don't want to do that, is what you're saying.
Whenever we take an action, whether it's an overreaction or an underreaction, if we're doing it from a negative emotion, the outcome is usually negative. It's
Right.
not 100%, but it is really high percentage. And oftentimes we regret those actions, even underaction, right? Like avoidance is a big underaction. We can avoid things for years and have a lot of regret and say, why have I been avoiding this for years and years on end?
What have you been avoiding for years?
I don't think I've been avoiding anything for years. But sometimes we think only in the form of overreacting, but it comes in the underreacting quite a bit as well.
Right.
And so when we don't slow our brain down and try to dive into the process that it's going through, we do a disservice to ourselves, our spouse, our marriage, the intimacy, building the relationship on honesty, and again, that room to grow. When we are able to be transparent about that, we're showing that we value growth, right? That we value space and individuality to still exist in the marriage. And that cannot be underestimated, like how important that is. And so it is an act of love. And I think sometimes we don't realize that when you're able to say, I need a minute to collect my thoughts, that is such a beautiful place to be for yourself. You give yourself a gift to tune back in before taking a decision that you'll regret.
So back to the topic. I mean, that's connected. I'm going to connect it back to the beginning. Taking time to say, I need a minute. You might not even say that, but instead of thinking, I can't believe that my spouse did that, or what is their problem, or what kind of a person does that? Instead of that, you could say, you know what, I'm going to take a minute and I'm going to think about what they might be feeling or what might be bothering them or what might I have done to cause them to behave that way. Now, look, you might end up having a conversation and they may be just being a jerk. And it might not be justified the way that they're behaving. But that doesn't mean that you have to respond immediately in that second, because most of the time you're probably going to misinterpret what just happened.
Yeah.
And if you don't take that time and take a step back before you just accuse them of doing something terrible, that can help too.
Yes. So I just think that this is such a beautiful way to show love that probably most people don't think of, is to really just slow things down, give some space, give some time, and increase your own thought awareness and challenge your own negative thoughts. Challenge them. Challenge where they're coming from. And I think as one final tip, from how I see it, is that you can ask yourself another question. Instead of like, what kind of a spouse would do this? Ask yourself, like, what kind of a spouse can show love even with a different facial expression? I can.
Yeah.
And then you search for ways like how to go about doing that, right? It's like you want to have these mini interventions with yourself and ask questions that actually lead you to a better answer. When we say like, what kind of a spouse does that? The answer is never good. It's
Right.
never a
Never.
helpful answer. We call them like dead end questions. They don't help the situation. They make it worse. But if we can ask a different type of question with ourselves that actually gives us a positive response, like what kind of a spouse responds to different facial features, different facial expressions. One that's like thinking through things, one that's like trying to skill up, one that is trying to give their spouse extra room to be human. That's on us. And we can be like, hey, I want to be that kind of a spouse. Let me try some of those things. Mm-hmm. That's a very different place to try to respond than from a super negative, blaming place, because this is more about self-growth and self-development, and that feels good. That feels so much better to respond from self-development than blame.
If you're not developing, then you're going to feel stuck and trapped.
And
with that spouse that does that thing.
And feeling stuck and trapped, that is not a fun place to be.
Well, yeah, because then you're going to start looking for, fake happiness other places.
Yeah.
That grass is always greener.
Yeah.
It really is. And when we start thinking these things, it's really easy to go to that place where you start thinking that, oh, everyone else is so happy and everyone else is, having the time of their life. Look at these people who aren't even married and how much fun they have. They don't have to deal with a spouse like that. So why even be married?
Yeah.
So I love being married, but it's not easy.
No.
And that's the beauty of it. The growth that comes from that, the things that we learn, it's totally worth it. And so that doesn't just come automatically either. We have to work for it to be worth it. And if we work for it to be worth it, then it's going to be exponentially more worth it than not working through marriage.
Right. Well, and I think sometimes too, that we forget such a basic principle. Like when we work hard towards something, we feel better. It obviously has usually good effects, right? Like if I work really hard to improve my skills, it's going to have a positive effect on our relationship. That's awesome. That's a benefit. That's a blessing. But I get to feel good when I'm working on trying to improve some part of myself.
Yeah.
And that has such a positive influence.
Well, if you're not doing that, then it's going to be really hard to make it in this world that's constantly trying to tear down marriage and constantly trying to distract you from what's really important. So step it up, skill up, improve, and it will be worth it. We know it's true.
That's right. So this week, I hope you guys will be able to keep these things in your mind. And if you find yourself asking that question, try to have that mini intervention with yourself and be able to express your process and give your marriage that space and that room to grow. It's totally worth it.
Oh, yeah.
Well, remember, the more you restore this type of intimacy with yourself, the more you restore it with your spouse. Thank you so much for listening today, and we hope you will join us again next week.
So long.